right. If you missed Tuesday night Race Chat Live, you missed Chris, Taz, and Miss Lee talk about Mother's Day race start time and the Throwback Weekend.
All right, so let's talk about Mother's Day start times. And should we throw away the throwbacks?
Start time is ridiculous. You have two for sure weekends in the racing year that you know are going to be guaranteed family days, and that's Easter Sunday and Mother's Day. They learned the lesson from Easter the year before, but they said, okay, well, you know, it was because of the sunshine and the dirt was dusty and stuff. But I really thought somewhere or another they realized that at 6 o'clock in the evening on Easter, most people are either at home or they're at least in front of the dinner table, maybe the TV, maybe having that late evening gathering. At the same time, it still kind of keeps the door open to be able to watch something. I mean, every family event I've ever gone on, it's not like they turn the TV off, right, guys? I mean, I don't know what area you're from, but wherever we go for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever it may be, we're going to find the ball game that's on, right? That's part of the talking points that you have at family get-together. So to miss that and start in the middle of the day, when people were out in the lunch in the spring evening with their mothers or their loved ones, NASCAR expected us to get in front of the TV, and they expected mothers to sacrifice their one weekend to go to the racetrack with the husbands and the boys and the young girls. Well, I mean, you know, I think NASCAR could do a better job at that. Like, are y'all in agreement that the start time was absolutely ridiculous?
Why isn't the throwback race a Saturday night race? Is what I want to know.
Why is it not a night race, period? Like it used to be?
Exactly. This isn't the Southern 500, and I've never understood how the throwback somehow got pushed from the Southern 500 over to this May race. I don't. Who decided? Because the whole idea was the Southern 500 was the throwback race, which brings up what you said earlier, Taz Taylor, about is it time to move the throwback? Because obviously Darlington's done screwed it up. Like, are we doing two throwbacks? Are we just doing one throwback? I understand it's on the cusp of the Indianapolis 500. We just left the Kentucky Derby, and they kind of want to keep that vibe going between the. But guys, come on, seriously. Like, it's Mother's Day weekend. That's, you know, that in itself should not have an overlapping event, right? It should be, if you're going to have a race on Mother's Day, then by gosh, surround yourself with mothers and make it a mother event, you know? Save the throwbacks for the Southern 500, right? The start time was unfortunate, and the throwback just seems to be misplaced. Miss Lee?
You know what? I like the idea if we're going to continue racing at Northborough to make that the throwback race, all-star race. I like the throwback. I don't want to see the throwbacks go away, but it needs to have its own unique niche, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think that dedicating like a 90s or 80s throwback is maybe something that they should look into. Celebrating what era we need to celebrate in, whether it's the 80s era, the 90s era, the 2000s era. I think all those are moving us into the direction of saying, wait a minute, where is the common what is it? The noticeability. Back in the 80s and 90s, these cars were noticeable, and it didn't matter who was behind the wheel. You could look at the poster, and it could bleed together, and you could say, that's Brett Bodine. That's Ricky Rudd right there in the Tide car. That's the Interstate Batteries car right there. That's the Dale Earnhardt car. That's the Davey Allison car, right? I mean, we could look at that poster board, and it'd be half blurred out, and we could name whose cars are. There's the Kodak car. You know, and so we've gotten away from that over the years. And I feel like, you know, that's a major correction the NASCAR's got to figure out, how to get these cars back to that, where even if they have a sponsor, that car is recognizable. And let me tell you, it can be done. It can be done because it's done in other sports like Formula One. All the 10 cars are the same color. I mean, you know who's Alpha Prime, you know who's the Mercedes, you know who's Aston Martin, because they're all the same color, the team cars. Now, I'm not saying that I want to see that in NASCAR, but we can have sponsors own a car and not necessarily influence the color of the car. Like the color of the car could be the same. And I'm not, I don't know how you guys feel about that, whether or not you think that, but I do know that product noticeability is a big factor. And from week to week, you don't know who's in what car. The Celsius brand, my goodness. You can't just look out there and see Celsius and know what car they're sponsoring, because they sponsor 5 different cars. You know, it's great that they're putting money into the sport, but at the same time, it's brand recognition, but not driver brand recognition. I think those two matter. What are you guys' thoughts on it, Taz? I'm gonna go with you this time.
So, I'm with Lee. Don't get rid of the Throwback Weekend. If we keep North Wilkesboro, regardless if it's an all-star race, regardless if we somehow make it a cup points paying race, I would honestly prefer the Throwback Weekend to move to North Wilkesboro. I feel like Darlington, since the deal of the Southern 500 race being the playoff opener, and you have to have, and with the playoff cars, you have to have the special colored banners, and the spoilers and stuff like that. You can't have those on the throwback cars, which I give props to Darlington for moving the Throwback Weekend from the Southern 500 Labor Day weekend to the first time we would go to Darlington. The only thing I feel like they've missed on that mark is the time frame running in the day instead of night, which I believe if you're going to run a throwback race, it needs to be at nighttime, right? That's just my honest opinion. I don't like seeing throwbacks being ran in the day, only because, like, some of these throwbacks, right, I feel like they're more recognizable when you run them under the lights. And I've always seen throwback Darlington races being ran under the lights for the most part that I've watched NASCAR, not ran during the day. So
right.
I would prefer the throwbacks to stay. In terms of what and Chris, I get what you're saying, you know, kind of go with like a certain theme for a Throwback Weekend. In my honest opinion, I like the openness of throwbacks. The only pickiness type of deal I have when it comes to throwbacks is I want to hear the story behind it. Like, yeah, I want to see the cars that make me go, oh, I remember back then with that. But if there's a throwback scheme that I may not know about, right, I would like to hear, like, is there some sort of attachment to it? Like I'm trying to think of a good one. I think there was the Tony Stewart scheme, throwback scheme that Chase Briscoe did, right? I didn't know that scheme until they announced the details of it. Like, oh, this was Tony Stewart's USAC car. And I'm like, okay, I see the connection. I see the story. I like that throwback. It makes sense, right? You go to, say, a throwback, like I'm going to use RCR, and they completely threw everyone for a left curveball on this stupid deal. When they released their throwback, and I'm using air quotes for that one, for Kyle Busch, they said, "Oh, we're going to throw it back to Kyle Busch's first win with RCR." I'm like, that's not a freaking throwback. Are you goddamn kidding me right now?
The Lucas Oil one? Or the black and red one? Yeah, I think it was the Lucas Oil one.
And, here's a good throwback that was ran, but completely failed. Kevin Harvick's throwback from this past weekend in Darlington. It was a throwback to the paint scheme of his original Cup debut, which was the Jeff Green number 30 AOL car. That was what the throwback was, but I guess the sponsor kind of said no, you have to use our colors or something. And you look at Harvick's car and you sit there like, that's a throwback? Like, we're supposed to recognize that?
Yeah. I thought it was just
like
something
like when they said the stories, like that's not a good story behind it. There's no attachment. Yeah, okay, it's supposed to resemble this, but if it's supposed to resemble that, then actually try to resemble it. Don't just make up your own bullshit, Throw in my colors because my colors are better. Like, no, don't throw that fucking crap in there. Sorry for my little language.
I mean, no, it's exactly right. I mean, sponsors shouldn't control the color of the damn car. Yeah, sure, the Lucas Oil car was really cool. It was blue. It was big Lucas Oil colors and all, and that's fine and dandy. But if NASCAR put a standard in and said, look, your car should be, you need to submit your design of your car color, and it has to be approved. And, I don't know if you would see a flock of everybody going to black race cars, but I guarantee you it would probably be about 3 colors. So it's probably a really bad idea to try to color code the cars. But there needs to be some kind of brand recognition, if not the product brand, then at least the brand of the driver, right?
Well, if you remember, Chris, this is where sponsors can really play in the throwback deal. You'll go back to the Starcom racing days, right? When they threw back to the Sterling Marlin Coors Light car, obviously they didn't have Coors Light as a sponsor. So what did Starcom do? They took the sponsor for that weekend and they played along with it. They changed the logo to match similar to the Coors Light logo. If sponsors could, just follow that. If you can't land the actual sponsor, I mean, I know it's hard to bring back a sponsor like a lot of people are giving Ross Chastain the huge credit in Trackhouse Racing because they brought back an old sponsor for at least one race, and it was a throwback race. They threw it back to Dale Jarrett with the UPS. They got UPS on the car. They nailed it on the head of the coffin. You go to Ricky Stenhouse's Dale Jarrett throwback. They had the scheme, but the sponsor didn't play along with it. They didn't get the UPS sponsorship, but their sponsor could have at least tried to play along with it instead of just throwing your usual nonsense out there, besides changing, the colors.
I like Chris's idea of honoring an era. So pick, a particular year. Or maybe, a couple of years. And I also like your idea, Taz, that you mentioned of trying to get those old sponsors back for just the one race. Of course, that might be difficult with, them not allowing tobacco sponsors and stuff like that. But, it's a thought. It's an idea of making it really significant and narrowing it down and making it more driver sponsor specific.
If we were to play along of everyone's ideas and whatnot for Throwback Weekends, let's say we have 2 Throwback Weekends, right? So we'll do Darlington, for example. We'll keep that as an open Throwback Weekend. You can run any throwback you want. Personally, for me, if you're going to run a throwback, I feel like there should be some sort of attachment either to the team of some kind or to the driver. Like, obviously, there was quite a few throwbacks this past weekend that of the father-son throwback, right? Chase throwing back to Bill Elliott during the Evernham days. Ryan Blaney throwing back to his dad's sprint car. Ryan Preece, I believe, did a throwback to his dad's late model days. You know, I like the story the attachment. As I mentioned, Chase Briscoe throwing it back to Tony Stewart's USAC racing days. And then if North Wilkesboro's still on the schedule, and if people want to run throwbacks, put a theme in there, you know, like do like a 90s throwback theme, do a 70s throwback theme. At least North Wilkesboro can do a throwback, can still be part of the throwback deal. Well, at least have a theme. Make the teams work for it. Make the teams think, you know?
Yeah. Well, and the throwback was, you know, I think a way to lure old sponsors back in, give the brand recognition some credit. What would you if you were to throw back to this era, you know, 20 years from now? What you know, there'd be some odd schemes, right? We wouldn't know what to really throw back to. So that in itself, it is an alarming situation. All right, when you start to analyze that. So basically, we are honoring something that we are no longer in tradition of doing, which, you know, I think should open our eyes and say, hey, look, there's a reason. And now it's gotten completely out of control because we're not even trying to recognize something that we're not even trying to recognize something we would recognize. Now we're just recognizing something to recognize it, right? We're just making something like Tony Stewart's USAC car. Who knew that was Tony Stewart's? Like you said, you didn't recognize it. So we've gotten completely off of the whole idea of why we were doing a throwback. You know, if you don't know that that's such and such's car by looking at it, then I think it kind of defeats the purpose. When we were seeing those Dale Earnhardt themes and the Richard Petty throwbacks and the what was that one? The ghost looking car, the 1981 Buddy Baker car. You know, the Dyguard Mountain Dew car. You know, all those. That was what the throwback was supposed to be about. But instead, now, you know, it's throwing back the throwback Kyle Busch's win earlier in the season. As of what was already stated here, it's kind of gotten out of hand. There needs to be some boundaries. If you're going to make this, when Major League Baseball does throwback uniforms, they do it right? They do it right. I mean, you may not recognize those throwbacks either, but everybody's in the same era. Everybody's in the same. Everybody's dressed the same. So there's got to be some organization in it.
That's where I kind of threw in, like, if we keep North Wilkesboro on the schedule of some sort of kind, let Darlington be an open throwback weekend. Like, drivers can do any throwback they want. Personally, for me, if you're going to do a throwback, do it right. You either get the sponsor that hasn't been there in a while and come back for at least that one race, or you have the sponsor, you know, the current sponsor that you have, let them play along to the old sponsor you're supposed to be throwing back to. Or at least whatever throwback scheme you're doing, have some sort of story attachment to it. It may not be a throwback people may necessarily know, but at least if there's a good story behind it, or some good attachment to it, you know, that's great. Like the 48 throwback was a throwback to the spotter. I don't remember. I'm trying to remember the story behind it, but I know it's some attachment to the spotters. And you normally don't see throwbacks in honor of the spotters. You know, I like the attachment there. But I feel like if North Wilkesboro stays on the schedule and people want to do throwbacks, throw in some sort of fun with it. You know, do a theme. Do like the 70s theme. Do like an 80s theme. Or do like 10 to 20 throwbacks there, even though it's not very much far of a throwback, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I disagree with what you say, Taz, is that I think we should only have the one throwback weekend. Otherwise, I agree with everything you said.